Okay, so you want to own a private island. Buy a speck of land surrounded by water, build a house nobody can bother you in, and never deal with a neighbor again for the rest of your life. Here's the strange part. The island itself is almost never the expensive part. The part that bankrupts people is everything that has to happen after you already own it. The part nobody puts in the real estate listing. By the end of this video, you'll know exactly what these things actually cost. Why the same island can be priced at $50,000 or $50 million, depending on one invisible detail. Why getting drinking water onto a rock in the middle of the ocean is harder than buying the rock itself. And why the single biggest threat to your private island isn't a hurricane. It's your own government deciding it wants the land back. Let's start with what these things actually cost, because the range is enormous and almost nobody understands why. At the very bottom of the market, you can find small, undeveloped islands in places like Nova Scotia, the Bahamas out islands, or parts of Central America, for as little as $50,000 to $200,000. These are typically a few acres, no buildings, no power, no fresh water source, and often no legal dock. You're buying raw land that happens to be surrounded by water, nothing more. Move up a tier, and you get into islands with some existing infrastructure, a small structure, a generator, maybe a well. These run anywhere from $500,000 to $5 million, depending on size and location. This is the range where most private buyers actually transact. Small enough to be somewhat affordable, developed just enough that you're not starting completely from zero. At the top of the market, you're talking about fully developed private islands with a main residence, guest housing, a private airstrip or helipad, a deep water dock capable of handling a yacht, and full utility infrastructure. These sell for $20 million into the hundreds of millions. Necker Island, Richard Branson's property in the British Virgin Islands, is reported to be worth in the neighborhood of $100 million today, though Branson originally bought it in 1978 for around £180,000, which even adjusted for decades of inflation is a return that makes almost any other asset class look foolish by comparison. Here's the detail that explains almost the entire spread in pricing, and it has nothing to do with the size of the island or how nice the beach is. It's whether you own the land in fee simple, meaning outright forever, the way you'd own a house, or whether you're buying a long-term lease from a government that technically owns the land underneath you. In the Bahamas, freehold ownership by foreign buyers is generally permitted and straightforward, which is part of why the Bahamas has become one of the most popular private island markets in the world. In Fiji, by contrast, foreign nationals cannot generally own land outright at all. What gets sold as a private island in Fiji is very often a 99-year lease, which sounds like a long time until you realize you're not passing down an asset to your grandchildren, you are passing down the back half of a countdown clock. Two islands that look identical in a listing photo, same size, same palm trees, same turquoise water, can be worth wildly different amounts of money because one comes with a title and the other comes with an expiration date. Now, before you get anywhere near making an offer, there's a legal question that kills more private island purchases than any other single factor, and it's whether you're allowed to build anything on the island at all. This sounds like a formality. It is not. Many jurisdictions classify offshore islands under strict environmental protection statutes, particularly if the island supports coral reef systems, mangroves, or nesting seabird populations. In parts of the Caribbean and the South Pacific, an island can be zoned in a way that permits ownership, but prohibits any permanent structure larger than a small dwelling. No dock extension, no helipad, no desalination plant. Buyers have paid 7 figures for islands only to discover during the permitting process that the environmental agency will not approve construction of the house they already designed. The lesson experienced island brokers repeat constantly is that you do not buy the island first and ask about zoning later. You get written planning approval before you sign anything, because reversing that mistake after closing can cost you the entire value of the purchase. Let's say the zoning checks out and you close on the island. This is where the real spending begins. And it starts with something most people never think about until they're standing on their new property, which is that there is almost certainly no fresh water underneath your feet. Small islands generally do not have reliable freshwater aquifers the way the mainland does. Your options are limited, and all of them are expensive. You can ship water in by barge on a recurring schedule, which is workable for a small seasonal cabin but becomes absurdly costly for a full-time residence. Or you can install a desalination system, a machine that turns seawater into drinking water through reverse osmosis. A residential-scale desalination plant capable of supporting a single household runs anywhere from $30,000 to over $100,000 to install, plus a meaningful ongoing cost in electricity and filter replacement because these systems are mechanically demanding and run essentially non-stop. Then there's power. Unless your island happens to sit close enough to the mainland for an underwater cable connection, which is itself a project that can run into the millions of dollars, depending on distance and seabed conditions, you are generating your own electricity. That usually means a diesel generator as the baseline, supplemented increasingly by solar arrays and battery storage to cut down on the cost. And hassle of shipping fuel out to a rock in the ocean on a boat every few weeks. A fully off-grid solar and battery system, sized for a substantial private residence, can run several $100,000 once you include the panels, the inverters, the battery bank, and the backup generator you still need for cloudy stretches. Waste management is its own problem, because you cannot simply run a sewage line to a municipal system that does not exist. Most private islands rely on septic systems, or in more developed cases, small-scale treatment plants, and getting either of these installed and functioning to code, especially in a jurisdiction with strict marine environmental protections, is its own multi-tens of thousands of dollar project before you've built a single bedroom. And then there's the boat, or more accurately, boats, plural. Because a private island isn't reachable by car. You need, at minimum, a reliable vessel for routine transport of people and supplies, and in most cases, a second, larger vessel or a barge relationship for moving construction materials, generators, and heavy equipment onto the island in the first place. Every renovation, every appliance, every bag of cement has to cross water, and that dramatically inflates the cost of construction compared to building the identical house on the mainland. Contractors who specialize in island builds routinely quote construction costs at 1.5 to 2 times what the same square footage would cost on solid road accessible ground, purely because of the logistics of getting materials and labor out to the site and back every single day. Add it all up, and a buyer who thought they were closing out their spending at the moment they bought the island for, say, $2 million, often discovers that infrastructure, water, power, waste, dock construction, and a functional access boat adds another $1 to $3 million before the house itself is even built. This is the trap that catches nearly every first-time private island buyer. The listing price is the beginning of the checkbook, not the whole of it. Now, here's the part almost nobody thinks about until they're already deep into the project, which is that nature does not treat your island gently, and insurance companies know it. Private islands, almost by definition, sit exposed to open water with no windbreak from other land, no shared seawall, no neighboring structures to absorb wind force. In hurricane-prone regions like the Caribbean and parts of the South Pacific, insuring a private island residence is either extremely expensive or, in the case of some insurers, simply unavailable at any price after a certain point, forcing owners into specialized surplus lines coverage that costs multiples of what equivalent mainland coastal property insurance would run. Some owners of remote islands choose to self-insure entirely, meaning they accept that if a major storm destroys the property, they are rebuilding out of pocket, because the premiums on the open market became uneconomical relative to the value of the structure. Richard Branson's own Necker Island was largely destroyed by Hurricane Irma in 2017, with the main house burning down during the storm. It was rebuilt at enormous additional expense because that's simply what owning exposed property in a hurricane corridor eventually requires of you. There's a deeper risk sitting underneath all of this that has nothing to do with weather, and it's the one that surprises buyers the most, which is that owning the island does not necessarily mean you control what happens to it. In many jurisdictions, foreign ownership of land, including islands, is subject to review and can be restricted, taxed heavily, or in rare but real cases expropriated for public use, with compensation set by the government rather than negotiated by the owner. Coastal and island land in numerous countries is also subject to setback rules, meaning the government retains rights to a strip of shoreline around your island for public access or environmental protection, regardless of what your deed says about the boundaries. Buyers who assume that owning an island means owning it the way they'd own a house in the suburbs, with total control over every square foot, frequently discover after the fact that a meaningful portion of their shoreline is legally a public easement, and their fully enclosed private paradise has a public footpath running through part of it, whether they like it or not. Step back for a second, because the whole category is a paradox in the same way a casino or an airport is. A private island is sold as the ultimate symbol of complete control, total privacy, nobody telling you what to do with your own land. And yet, almost every layer underneath that promise is dependent on infrastructure you don't control, weather you can't predict, insurance markets that can simply decide not to cover you, and a government that retains far more authority over your slice of paradise than the marketing brochure ever mentions. You're not really buying isolation. You're buying the extremely expensive privilege of building your own miniature version of civilization's basic utilities from scratch on a piece of land the sea is actively trying to take back. Two scenarios, real numbers. Scenario 1, a small undeveloped island purchased for around $300,000 in a freehold jurisdiction like the Bahamas Out Islands. Add a modest off-grid solar system, a small desalination unit sized for a caretaker's cottage, a simple dock, and a basic single vessel for transport, and you're looking at another $400,000 to $600,000 before you have anything resembling a functional seasonal retreat. Total all-in cost, roughly $700,000 to $1 million for a small, simple, livable private island. Ongoing annual costs, fuel, maintenance, insurance, and boat upkeep typically run $40,000 to $80,000 a year, even when nobody is staying there. Scenario 2. A fully developed marquee island in the $20 to $50 million range. The kind with a real house guest villas, a private dock capable of handling serious boats, and full utility infrastructure already built out. Annual operating costs for a property at this scale, staff, maintenance, insurance in a hurricane zone, fuel, and boat operations commonly run into the millions of dollars a year before you've spent a single night there. Insurance alone on a marquee coastal property in an exposed hurricane corridor can run into the hundreds of thousands of dollars annually, assuming a carrier will underwrite it at all. Either way, the island was never really the purchase. The purchase is the decades-long commitment to running your own private, miniature, extremely expensive version of a town's entire public works department. Water, power, waste, transport, and emergency response on a piece of land that the ocean, the government, and the insurance market all reserve the right to take a very direct interest in whenever they choose. Richard Branson found that out the hard way in 2017 when a storm burned his island's main house to the ground in a single night and rebuilt it anyway because that's the actual price of the postcard.